Boom. All right, we're here with Dr. Jack Cruz. How you doing, Jack? Nice to meet you finally.
Pretty good. Nice to meet you as well.
Right. Okay. So as I explained, Lauren is here. She's going to ask you the first question, as she does on most of the shows. So go for it. What do you have?
Why was your TED Talk banned?
I think because the message that I was delivering basically was destroying a centralized paradigm. It was probably the first pitchfork swing at centralized medicine in 2011, and I was surprised at the response initially. I literally had the FBI and the state medical board visit me right after the talk. And I knew right away that it was going to be a problem. But when you consider the ramifications of that meeting and kind of some of the things that we've all been through the last 3 years with COVID, I think it's ultimately a good thing. You have to look at that wound creating some wisdom, because anytime you can fact check a centralized paradigm so that people are able to get the truth. In other words, it's an anti-censorship issue. It creates anti-fragility. And the bottom line is, I think people in the world need to know that while some drug companies do good things, many of them do bad things. And that was, I think, the message they were worried about getting out. And you're a really young kid. This probably happened way before you were born, but I think your dad probably understands this better. And plus, you guys are in Europe, and I'm in the States, but right now in El Salvador. And this predates all the COVID nonsense. I mean, we're talking by a long shot. And when you see that they were interested in stopping the discussion about these issues, it actually raises probably a bigger question. Why were they so interested in stopping the discussion of this before what we went through from 2020 through 24? And I think maybe we could discuss that issue, because I do think those two events are connected. But that would be my answer to you. I think this was, they don't want us to think. And because thinking is really dangerous for centralized paradigms. And when we do think and we're able to ask the right questions and we maintain our curiosity, then I think not only to become self-sovereign, but we also become better versions of ourselves. And I think your dad probably agrees with this because he's a Bitcoiner, but you're a young girl. And I think it's a really important lesson for you to learn that you have to question everything. You even have to question your parents. The things that they teach you, you can't take as gospel. And that doesn't mean I want you to become an absolute rebel and not listening to any of the good things, that they tell you. But I want you to be able to learn how to be a decentralized thinker, because effectively that's what people ask me, what do I do on the internet? I actually teach people how to think well. And when you think well, Bitcoin doesn't become, an amorphous concept. Decentralized medicine doesn't become an amorphous concept. In other words, you start to come to it and say, God, this makes a lot of sense. Why am I not putting this into my life? Why am I not considering this more? Why do I think this is the fringe when it's actually the meat of the sandwich? So I think that's why they banned me.
Perfect. And we'll get deeper into that, because a lot of the people might not know the content of the talk. So, but first of all, thank you, Lauren.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. No problem. It was nice meeting you.
Nice meeting you too. Bye-bye. Thank you.
All right, Jack. Yeah. So, jumping straight in there, straight in the deep end. And for those that don't know you, I first heard you when Clubhouse, guys, as if Clubhouse doesn't even exist anymore. But I was just cruising around Clubhouse back in the day, probably during one of the lockdowns. So I'm guessing 2020. And you jumped on And I could hear the passion in your voice, and I could hear that, like, whoa, man, like here's someone that's been deeply affected, like myself and like so many other plebs, deeply affected by this idea of Bitcoin and what it could mean for humanity and taking us forward. And I remember actually we DM'd at that point, and I think you'd set up to go on Phil's show, and then we just lost the thread. But I heard you recently again on Doc Malik's podcast, where you were
Yeah.
doing a great job of orange pilling him, and he's since had Runa Ostgaard on, who's written Fraud Coin. He's since had Saifuddin Amus on, and I was invited to go on as well. And I went to his home and about 3 weeks ago and just been on as well. So it's been nice to see Ahmad has started really digging into Bitcoin himself as well. And you can even donate with him now on Bitcoin. He has his own hardware wallet, as you explained to him, would be absolutely necessary. So well done. You got the ball rolling on him as well.
Just think about the question. Just think about the question your daughter just asked me. The poor Ahmad is now canceled by the NHS, and that's kind of the segue when you actually think about it. That you would never anticipate from a banned TED Talk that a doctor or orthopedic surgeon in the UK could be canceled because of his beliefs, in and around the mandated policies by the NHS. But here we are. And the good thing is I told him that he was going to need to embrace Bitcoin before he got banned. And now that he's doing it, it makes me happy. In fact, he just contacted me yesterday and he wants me to come back on his podcast again, because I think now that he gets it, now I think he's really interested to see what the next step is, because I've told him already that I believe I'm going to be able to restore his license and his ability to practice if he chooses to do it, with some of the things that I'm doing here with the government in El Salvador. And it's really important to get this message out to the masses that you need to protect yourself from central banks, from governments, from mandates, from centralized institutions that are looking to take our sovereignty away.
Mm-hmm. So let's back up to the TED Talk again that you delivered in Nashville, of all places, where we now have Bitcoin Park, which is a kind of beautiful thing to see.
Right.
What was the subject of that talk? What message were you delivering? And
the message I was delivering is that there was a synthetic drug trial that was done by a big pharma company named Amgen that actually showed that light and cold could be used to reverse obesity. And they didn't want that information going out. In fact, one of the things that they did is they canceled the synthetic leptin trial and almost immediately then started to patent the cold receptors in humans. They started to patent a lot of the light receptors, in and around leptin. And, back at that time in 2011, nobody really knew about the biophysics of, how the pathway worked. And this was me going on the stage in Nashville to warn everybody in the public that something nefarious was going on. And obviously the way I did it, Daniel, was I did it in storybook fashion. I told them a story so that they would be intrigued about what was going on, with my hope that people would begin to question the paradigm of what Big Pharma was doing and how much power they had to literally block information from the public, because they wanted to patent parts of the pathway so they could make new chemicals, but never let you see the real issue, which is that the leptin melanocortin pathway really works on light and cold. And you didn't need a drug to actually operationally do this. And you have to remember, Daniel, if you don't need a drug, like if I show you the pathway and you don't need them, that hurts their profits. And you can see that's the reason why they were motivated to kind of shut me down. And the way in which they shut me down was shocking to me. I actually had parts of the federal government coming to visit me. I had medical investigators literally visit me 3 days after the event. The event coordinators told me that my talk would not be sent out, on the internet like everybody else's talk was, because there was an injunction against the talk at that time. And I was kind of stunned. I was like, wow, I must have really, really hit a nerve. And, that was a long time ago. We're almost talking 15 years ago. And when I think about where we are now, and that the obesity crisis, globally has now increased tremendously. And you think about the number one drug right now that's out is Ozempic. And Ozempic is now, there's a guy that's really big into talking about this issue now. His name's Callie Means. He's a guy in the United States whose sister is a doctor. And he's putting a lot of weight on the Ozempic thing because one of the European drug companies, Novo Nordisk, is the one that's actually printing money. You want to talk about a Cantillon effect? This is a Cantillon effect for them because of Ozempic. And he made the case that they are doing this in the United States to try to use a drug therapy to actually destroy the obesity crisis, which is complete folly. And if you think about what your daughter asked me, I actually gave you the answer in 2011 before you even knew what Ozempic was. And Ozempic is a drug that is a consequence of not understanding the leptin melanocortin pathway. So in other words, if you think Ozempic is a good idea, then it shows you how Big Pharma was very successful in muzzling Uncle Jack. And, when I come out, like, for example, a big Bitcoiner, Jason Williams, him and I got into it in Twitter a little bit about Ozempic because it's not that he cares too much about Ozempic. He cares more about other peptides. And I try to make the case to Jason, who's an absolute Bitcoin maximalist and owns tons of Bitcoin. I said, Jason, you cannot be considered a true Bitcoin maximalist to me if you're decentralizing your money and you're not decentralizing your biology. If you don't understand how important this is for people to get right, because think about it, Daniel, the people who own Bitcoin, like Jason's a perfect example. If you have billions of dollars in Bitcoin, what is it if you're dead at 40 years old or 50 years old? You basically have the legacy of Steve Jobs. And that's really not sovereignty. Bitcoin is time. And people don't realize that Bitcoin is not the most valuable asset we all own. It's actually time. And when you think about it, time is manufactured in cells by the circadian mechanism. And that also is a metronome, a timekeeper. So that's the link between Bitcoin and biology. And the case that I tried to make on Clubhouse, the case that I try to make on podcast, when we talk about this topic, because I really don't get the opportunity to talk about this topic very often, is that the link between health and wealth is substantial. But even the social link, the link that I'm trying to make with you now, is that I don't want to see Bitcoiners. Like, I don't want to see your daughter get all your Bitcoin. I want you to be here when you're an old man. I'd like you to fall off your roof at 90 years old because you're fixing it, break your hip and die that way, instead of, succumbing to, obesity, diabetes, Alzheimer's disease, metabolic diseases, things like that, or cancer. And I think when people get that idea, then they begin to understand, maybe I'm not thinking about decentralization enough. Maybe I need to decentralize my life a little bit more. And that's the step that I actually tried to make to Dr. Malik too. I said, look, you need to decentralize medicine. You do not run away from the fact that these guys try to shut you up. I told them, I've already been through this, in the States, even to this very day, I'm averaging spending between $25,000 and $50,000 a month in legal fees. I've been doing that for 10 years. So when you consider, how powerful this is, all you have to do is understand the story behind Ozempic. Ozempic is an obesity drug that they're using in the United States. Now Novo Nordisk is trying to expand it to Europe. So think about this. This drug is being used just like a shitcoin would be used. That's how I look at Ozempic. And I want people to understand that, yeah, you may have obesity, but you do not want to use the pharmaceutical alternative. It'd be much better for you to use the decentralized network that's nature to optimize your leptin melanocortin pathway so that you can keep your money. Like, I'd like you to take your Ozempic money and buy Bitcoin. That to me makes way more sense, than the other way around. And I'm not trying to tell people that you should embrace, the fact that you're obese. That's a totally different issue. That's an issue. Then you want to learn everything behind that. Then I think you join, my tribe on my website, and I'll teach you why these things are really happening. Because that really was the essence of the question that your daughter asked me. Where is this problem really coming from fundamentally? And that's not something that I think I can answer for you in a 15 to 18 minute TED Talk. What I needed to do in that TED Talk is be provocative. And as you know, it's been 15 years since that talk, and I've done thousands of podcasts since that time. And I think my thesis on obesity is pretty well known now. That cat's out of the bag. In fact, it's out of the bag so much that when I do podcasts, most people don't want to talk about the leptin prescription that I wrote a long time ago. People don't want to talk about the cold thermogenesis protocol I wrote in 2005 that predates everybody that's been talking about cold and cold exposure. It even predates the patents that the drug companies have used on the cold receptors. And that's where cool sculpting for the plastic surgeons came from. That patent was written in 2008. When you begin to realize this chain of events, and like, for example, you as a European guy, I hope you go read some of the SEC things on Novo Nordisk, and you'll see what their plan is. And when you go back and think about your little girl's first question to me, you're going to go, this is like an amazing time warp that Jack just took us through, because they try to ban their talk because they knew that the time for Ozempic was coming. They knew exactly what they were doing. Ozempic is manifested because I was censored. That's effectively what's really happened.
Oh man, it's so dark because they create the problem, then offer the solution, right? And
that's it.
Isn't
that what Chris Rock said that medicine was? It's just like a drug deal. And you don't realize it because drug dealers have a negative connotation and Big Pharma doesn't. And Daniel, I'm going to say something even more provocative that you'll probably be shocked at. I said this in El Salvador the other day in the presence of the Bukele administration. I said, what if I was to tell you that if you followed the laws of Pablo Escobar and the Colombian drug cartel, and you did what they told you to do through COVID, that you would be less likely to die by their advice than you would by the NHS or the FDA or the CDC. Then I proceeded to show them the data that this hyperbolic idea was actually in fact correct. Believe it or not, people that use cocaine or even cocaine laced with fentanyl died less than if you use the jab. And when people saw the data in the administration, this really got them woken up. And I said, do you understand that this data is coming to you because it started with your little girl's question? If you want to know why Uncle Jack is pissed off and passionate and is not going to stop, they try to censor the wrong person. And I'm not going to stop. They've tried to cancel me. In fact, so much so, I probably would have been canceled if it wasn't for the fact that one of my tribe members, one of my guys, is Jack Dorsey, who owned Twitter. That's the reason I wasn't canceled. In fact, that's the way the Bukele administration found me. They were like, how does this guy continue to say the things that Dr. Malik was censored for and get away with it? So they came and talked to me, and they asked me to give a presentation of how Jack would fix the world with decentralized medicine. And they loved the idea. And they said, okay, we need to do something with this. So the world is getting ready to hear what we're going to do on March 16th, 2024. It's called the Age of Light. And the event is going to be set on top of a volcano.
Love it.
And it should be a very, very interesting time, here for El Salvador after Bukele just won a historic election. When the world begins to find out that the person that they call a dictator has given freedom and money back to his people, and he's soon going to give freedom and medicine back to his people. And he's got a couple of other rabbits to pull out of his hat later this year. Remember, when you have 90% of the vote, you know that the people are behind you. And now he has 58 out of 62 seats in the legislative branch. Just so everybody's clear, that means he has 90% of the Congress behind him. And remember, they're a constitutional republic, just like the United States is. So what does that mean? That means you're at an extraordinary point of history where you can limit centralization at a corporate level if you have the political might to do it. So people have asked me, especially some of your countrymen, especially some of the people on Clubhouse, why did I pick El Salvador? And I think, Daniel, you're probably the first podcaster that's now beginning to see clearly why Uncle Jack is doing what he's doing. Because I made a bet early on El Salvador that if I was going to help change the world, this was the place most likely to do it. Why? Because I felt that the leadership here was embracing freedom. Therefore, medical freedom should be the next thing after monetary freedom. And I decided to plant myself down here and begin to squawk. And it turns out that the bet likely has worked. And like I said, I can't say much, but I can tell you big things are coming in 24. Everybody knows. I mean, the podcast we're doing today is February 19th. You know that Bukele won the election on February 4th. It's not hyperbole for me to say what I told you. He now has a 90% mandate from the people and in his Congress. So I would tell you, pay attention. Next week, Bukele is going to CPAC in the United States in Washington, D.C. Be ready, Daniel. I think you're going to like what President Bukele has to say.
Looking forward to it. Now, I want to take you back because you said something at the beginning. It just kind of like shocked me. Did you say that they were trying, or they did, patent the human body or parts of the pathway?
Yeah.
What's the word? How on earth can a company do that? How can they patent the human body?
Well, you can't. You have to realize the game that pharma plays. They can't patent light. Like, it's impossible for you to patent sunlight, and it's impossible for you to patent cold, right? Because people can do that. So what do? You go straight to the receptors that deal with light, and you go straight to the receptors that deal with cold, and you patent them. And that's exactly what they did.
The receptors in our body, in our cells.
Correct. Yes.
You can. How do they patent? Oh man, you're blowing my mind. All right, okay. Take me down that dark avenue. How can a pharmaceutical company patent part of a human being? What's
it's not
the law?
that they're doing a human being. They're telling you that this class of drugs that they developed, they own a patent on that. So they effectively block everybody else from studying this, because if you have a patent on it, it limits the scope of inquiry. Okay? Curiosity goes away. So if curiosity goes away, what does that mean for the researchers, like the PhD guys like Huberman and the rest? Well, they say, well, we're not going to study this because, these guys already have this, and then what happens to the clinicians like me and Dr. Malik? Then we never get to the point of where I went to figure out obesity is an inflammatory brain condition that is tied to poor light and not embracing the cold. That information never gets to the public, so they realize you don't need their drugs. What you need is to change your environment, because it turns out those receptors link directly to your environment. And that's actually how the pathway is built to work in mammals. So I laid that case out, to Huberman and Rick Rubin on the Tetragrammaton podcast a year ago. And you can see from Huberman's perspective, who is a centralized researcher at an ivory tower university, Stanford University, who's fully supported by who? Big Pharma. Do you know what he told me on Rick's podcast? Dude, I can't wait to come to your clinic and interview you there. Daniel, it's been 1 year.
Mm-hmm.
Not one phone call, not one email. So doesn't that sound kind of like the question your daughter asked me? Do you understand just how powerful this is? And believe it or not, and I probably shouldn't say this, but I'm about not giving two fucks. I actually invited Huberman to speak at the Age of Light event, radio silence. I'm giving him every opportunity to do what's right. Now, interestingly enough, he has talked about a lot of my information on his podcast, never mentioning my name. Why? Because I think Stanford and Big Pharma, they don't want to do that. I mean, I'll even take it a step further. Something else I shouldn't tell you. My nurse used to be a legal nurse consultant for Johnson & Johnson. She was involved in a big trial on a drug, and she was tasked with hiring neurosurgeons to fight on their behalf on the case. When my name came up to them, she said, this is probably the smartest guy you could ever get to do this case. He will figure out how to solve for X. And they said, oh no, we can't use him. He's too controversial and we can't control him. So we don't know what he's going to say. I mean, this could go the other way. So the reason I tell you this story is when you're a soothsayer, when you tell the truth, you have to realize you're pretty dangerous for the paradigm. And the thing that I want people to understand from an 80,000 foot view is Bukele hasn't run away from me. You know, remember, Bukele is the dictator in the world according to the West, right? Mm-hmm. But yet the dictator in the West is trying to disseminate freedom. He's not afraid of this. He's not even afraid of some of the consequences of some of the things that I'm helping him with here in the country. Why? Because he said ultimately it's good. If we can diminish our need for pharmaceuticals, that allows people to have more money in which to, you know, bring freedom to the life, to have life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. To me, that's actually what freedom's about. Freedom's not about having to spend more money on your drugs than you can on your food.
Yeah, of course. Right. Poor light and obesity. I got a question for you there. Basic question. Many people in Northern Europe, in particular, wintertime over Christmas, everybody puts on a few pounds and they just blame that on overindulgence and whatever else. But is there something else going on? Is it because it's winter? Is that...
Yeah, well, I mean, it's simple. I mean, and I'm glad you brought this up because this highlights the most obvious aspect of obesity. Remember, humans are part of the mammal family, okay? Mm-hmm. So are wolves, okay? I want you to hold this in your mind as we talk. The wolves in Yellowstone Park, because they have the same existence as the people in Scandinavia and Northern Europe. You know, we're talking Scotland, Norway, Sweden, Finland. So in the wintertime, the people that live in Europe, meaning the humans, they're inside with their fires, drinking their lattes, right? Enjoying Christmas with their family. And when they're in the inside, they have all man-made artificial light connected to the electric power grid, don't they? Mm-hmm. Does the wolf in the Yellowstone Park have any of that?
Nope.
Does the wolf in Yellowstone Park have clothes on because it's socially accepted in the wolf pack community? So right there, I just explained to you in a very, very quick way, third grade, without getting into any of the quantum mechanics, that you just altered your light signal and you altered your ability to sense cold. So you'll be shocked to find out, Daniel, that when you take a mammal and put it in its natural environment and ask it to live wild, it's wintertime when it's cold is the time when you're supposed to be thinnest. What did you say to me, my friend? Mm-hmm. You said, Jack, why is it in Northern Europe that we put on a few pounds when all other mammals are losing weight? You just solve for X. Okay? You just proved my point. And here's the funny part of the argument. I'll sit down with a guy like Doc Malik and he'll argue with me vehemently. Oh no, it's about our food. It's about our diet. It's about going to the gym. And I just chuckle at that. That is fucking pure folly. And the thing is, it sounds counterintuitive until you understand it. So Daniel, since you're a Bitcoin guy and not a biologist, the reason why this topic is really important for me is that the same thing happens with Bitcoin. People are like, there's no way Bitcoin can fix all these things in the world. You know, if you embrace it in part of your life, it just doesn't make any sense. It sounds too counterintuitive. Well, guess what? Turns out the leptin melanocortin pathway and obesity is the exact same story. And the reason why these two things are linked is because, believe it or not, fundamentally, both of them come down to light and timing. And it turns out time is created by light. Most people don't know that. So I like to tell people, you know, the story of circadian biology, why circadian biology allowed us to become complex because of the timing mechanism that's present in cells. This is a thermodynamic idea. So in the Industrial Revolution, you know that a lot of people talk about Gutenberg and how that was the most important machine ever. I submit to you that it wasn't. I think the clock and taking care of time is important. You're a Brit, so just realize you may have a new idea now about really how important Stonehenge is. Why is Stonehenge important? Because it actually told them the circadian biology and when to plant at the right time so that food would be linked to their life. In other words, that was the photosynthetic link. It was another clock that was important in the Stone Age, okay? So now here we are in the informational economy that you are doing a great job in explaining Bitcoin, you know, to the masses. And what people don't realize that Bitcoin's a digital metronome, you know, that society is now using. It's a clock and it's changing the world. It's an essential part of the informational age. And we are making that case to the world that if you don't have that as part of your portfolio, you're going to have a significant problem in the future when your sovereignty is taken away, such as what's going on with Rishi Sunak, what's going on with Jerome Powell, what happened through COVID. You know, people don't realize COVID was a compliance test for a coming economic reset. You guys in Europe are going to see it before we do in the United States. Why? Because we have the hegemony of the dollar. We'll be the last big power to fail because the dollar runs the show. But we've seen just recently with, you know, the Putin effect in Ukraine that he's now aligning the BRICS with gold. He's trying to show the world the same thing I try to do with my band TED Talk, that reliance on the dollar is an epic fail. And I don't want to get into, you know, the ideology of Putin, you know, kind of like your other countryman does, Peter McCormick, because I think Peter is so nearsighted with, you know, certain things. The bottom line is Putin is more of a Bitcoiner than Rishi Sunak is, certainly more than Boris Johnson was, because he's showing people that the ultimate evil is actually tied to the fiat system. And once people gain freedom of money, we all know as Bitcoiners, you and I especially, that gold isn't really the best answer. Bitcoin is a far better answer. But I think eventually the axis of power that Putin is getting behind him, meaning the oil people, the people with serious assets, they're going to come to the realization that Bitcoin is probably the way they want to do things. The big issue that in the BRICS, because China is a part of it, China banned Bitcoin. And I will tell you, there's a lot of big Bitcoiners out there like Tur Durmester, who's actually said recently, and Samson Mao, that the banning of Bitcoin by China will probably go down as one of the biggest mistakes of the 21st century. And it's probably going to be shown sooner rather than later. But I will tell you, the things that just went on with Putin and Tucker Carlson with that interview, I think that it's going to wake up a lot of governments out there that maybe we need to start thinking about another pathway to the U.S. Treasury and the U.S. dollar. And I think the reason why I think the Ukraine war highlights this, we have sent 10% of what the Bitcoin network is worth right now from the US Treasury to Ukraine, to basically take care of a zombie country. Just like we talk in Bitcoin, that the Federal Reserve keeps zombie companies alive in the United States by printing shit money. The same thing is true with Ukraine. And the more we prop them up, the worse the situation gets. But I have a different take on it, Daniel. I actually fundamentally think that the money we're spending in Ukraine is great if you're a Bitcoiner, because it pushes further the United States to go into debt. And I've actually said to several of the Bitcoiners out there who really don't like how forceful I am with my message, that next year, by January 1st, I think we're going to be close to $40 trillion in debt. I know Preston Precious talked about, he thinks we may be at 37, 38. If you look at what's going on in U.S. Treasury markets, and how bad they've been, James Lavish in the United States is doing yeoman duty on Twitter in keeping all of us informed about what's going on in the machinations of the bond market. I'm doing the math as the auctions come out, as he gives me the data, and I think we're going to be 39 to 40 trillion in debt. What does that mean for people in the United States? It means it's going to be, meaning the interest payment on the debt will be the biggest line item in the congressional budget within the next 2 or 3 years. Why is that music to Daniel Prince and Jack Cruz's minds? Because we own Bitcoin. We are all about them spending money. Now, the problem that we have, or the problem that you have, you are trying to wake up the masses in the UK. You're trying to wake up the masses in continental Europe. You're trying to have an effect in Asia and also the United States to say, look, guys, you need some air in your life raft. That air is Bitcoin. And you don't need as much as you think. In fact, I tell people the more money you have in fiat in the bank, the more Bitcoin you need, because you're going to need that backstop. Because you can go, if the US Treasury market fails, you're going to go from being really, really wealthy to probably losing 90% of your wealth within 2 or 3 years. And, people on Clubhouse, when, you first met me, they thought that idea when I started talking about this in 2020 was crazy. And then we had the sequential bond years of 21, 22, 23, when you lost 35 to 40% per year in bond portfolios. Well, let me tell you something. Rich people, all over the world who store their money in treasuries didn't like that, because that's the first time in almost 100 years in the United States where that actually happened, where the upside down non-price discovery stock market, gave you more money back than the bond market. And look, that tsunami wave actually hit your country loud and clear when you almost went belly up when Liz Truss was in and you transitioned to Sunak. The Bank of England almost failed. And people don't realize it was because of what was going on in the US Treasury market. And, all these interconnected things are very much similar to the story that I told you about leptin, the cold receptors, and the light receptors. You don't understand how these things are connected, but they are. And then when the shit hits the fan and you're in Scandinavia, living as a zoo animal, you put on 10 or 15 pounds. Well, the same thing is true about how your money fails, okay? You have no idea what Jerome Powell's doing, how it's affecting treasury markets, how that affects pensions in the UK, how it affects banking regulations in Asia. And all of a sudden, you wake up and say, Evergrande just went belly up in China. China has the worst stock market they've had in 40 years. And you think everything's okay. Well, it's not. And the thing is, you come here and you do podcasts with people, and your little girl starts with a question. And what did we do? We took the question all the way from biology, all the way straight to finance, and you begin to realize these things are all connected, because it turns out that Amgen is one of those zombie companies. They are functionally being propped up by the Cantillon effect from Big Pharma. They're protected by the lobbyists in Congress. Same thing is true at Novo Nordisk, except that's true in continental Europe. The EU is propping them up. And now they have a plan to bring semaglutide, which is Ozempic, to Europe to take care of those fat Europeans that are up in Scandinavia. That's exactly what's coming. And it's amazing to me, Daniel, that people don't follow the breadcrumbs. They don't do it. And this gets back to the original question I told your daughter. I want you to question everything. I want you to begin to ask better questions, because when you ask better questions, then you get to the crux of the matter. And that's all that matters.
100% agree with you, mate. And I love this idea of the circadian rhythm, and it reminds me of something John Vallis said on the first pod he came on back in 2020, talking about Bitcoin and the blockchain. He basically said Bitcoin is the existential heartbeat of truth. And like, I can see you're already nodding your head furiously with that.
There's no doubt. But
right.
The thing is, people have to see it, though, Daniel. They have to see it in their own world. Remember, the theory of relativity taught us that time is relative. Actually, the implications, that means everything is relative. What John said is an axiomatic truth, but where does that have to hit? Like, it has to hit Daniel Prince, John Vallis, Jack Cruz, Peter McCormick, because our perception of the world that we live in is relative. Like, I don't have the same relativity as Daniel Prince or John Vallis or Peter McCormick, but I do have a duty on social media when either one of you three say something that's stupid, that I'm going to point it out to my tribe. Why? Because I have a lot of people that follow me. They don't follow me for the same reason they follow you guys. Mm-hmm. Remember that. I'm the biology clock guy. You guys are the financial clock people. You don't realize that we're from the same family. It's just like we're mammals. But your guys' perspective is way different than me. I look at Bitcoiners like you guys as you have a little bit of myopia. And I come to do podcasts like this, and I want to extend your field of view to realize that decentralization needs to be injected in every part of your existence because of what John Vallis really said. It does introduce truth to so many different parts of your life. For example, I just went nuclear on Peter on Twitter. I said, yeah, why would anybody listen to you? You rolled your sleeve up and took the jab just so you could travel to do your podcast. And you don't have any problem with that. Well, when you do bring this to him, he gets very defensive. Instead of being defensive, if you're a true Bitcoiner, let's open your mind to it. Let's talk about it. Because guess what? No one should take away your ability to do that. Well, let's champion that. And, I applaud you because you've had Doc Malik on. Peter doesn't seem to realize that because of his compliance, he set the tone for Doc Malik having his license taken away. And if you don't think, Daniel, that I have a problem with that, you're out of your mind. If you don't think that I'm going to ass slap Peter on social media, you're wrong. Because if you truly understand the ethos of Bitcoin that he says he does, he would have never done that. And do I think he owes Doc Malik an apology? Do I think he needs to have Doc Malik on? And here's the irony, because you know this better than him. Doc Malik wasn't on Bitcoin. Peter had the opportunity to educate him. You saw that I was the first Bitcoiner who's a doctor who reached out to Doc Malik and said, bro, you need to do this. You've done the same thing. So I applaud what you're doing. And I absolutely applaud the fact that you made the connection. Okay. It makes me realize that not everybody in the Bitcoin world in the UK is brain dead. That made me really happy. And I was more than happy to come on your podcast to talk about this, because this is something that I don't get that much of a chance to talk about. The cross-pollination of decentralization and how it affects medicine. I find it appalling what's happened to Doc Malik. Don't get me wrong. I find it's appalling what's happened to the Brits in terms of their pensions, in terms of their money, in terms of inflation. That's all the same thing. But people need to realize when you rolled up your sleeve, that was a compliance test for the economic reset. If you don't understand that basic concept, then you don't understand Bitcoin.
The great orange light. Although you focus on all kinds of different lights and light therapy. And this is something that a lot of Bitcoiners are really interested in. And it's funny because my wife, just before I come down to talk to you about this, my wife just showed me a little clip on Instagram, I think it was, about a guy talking about, and it's weird that you just mentioned myopia as well, using myopia, red light therapy to fight myopia. And I said, hold that thought, don't do any further research. I'm about to talk to the guy that could probably help us understand whether there's anything to that or you're just being pushed something. So and then I'll follow up with a more fun question after that about more light therapy. But what's going on there with red light therapy, and can it help people
Yeah,
with their
it can.
eyesight?
It can help, but it's not the full part of the story. You have to marry UV light with red light to get the effect. And the reason why myopia is functionally caused by the change in the shape of the eye. You know that the eye is a circle or a globe. When you get myopia, it becomes oblong. In other words, the eye lengthens. What controls the size of the globe? Dopamine and melatonin levels in the eye. And it turns out dopamine and melatonin levels in the eye actually control muscle fiber type. They control size and shape of things. But the big thing is they control the photoreceptor regeneration pathways in mammals. So this is effect for everybody. So about 10 or 15 years ago, there was something called digital myopia in Asia. And if you notice that a lot of young Asian kids, they all wear glasses because they're high myopes. The reason why is because of the phones. And it turns out the blue light from the phones destroys the photoreceptors. And it turns out that purple and red light, which is UV and infrared A, actually regenerate them. So in natural sunlight, you have the antidote already built in. But when you're a modern human addicted to technology or screen technology, you lose those two lights. And then what happens is the globe gets oblong. So what your wife is being sold by a lot of the people online is a half truth. I'm not going to take the red light guys apart because they are telling you adding red light back in, because red light is actually the antidote to blue light, and blue light is what tech screens destroy in us. The big thing that you need to add back into it would be in a UVA bulb. So even in Europe, you can find UVA bulbs. So what I would tell you to do, the room that you say get your EMR tech red light, you put that up in your house, and I would even tell you, Dan, you could put it on that wall behind you, right underneath that picture, and stand at 4 foot by 1 foot light there. And then just in a fixture above you, put a UVA bulb. You probably only need one or two in the room. Leave that on while you're doing your podcast, and then you're protecting your eyes and your body from that. And that would be a way for you to reverse it. Now, if it was nighttime here, you remember we just had the sunrise here in El Salvador. You would see that I have both UV and infrared A light. In fact, at my community in El Salvador, they call my house Casa Rojo. It's the red house. Why? Because every bit of red light is there. In fact, I'll send you, I'll put it out. I haven't done it yet. I will put out on Twitter for you later today a picture of Max and Stacy with me at my house. They have just bought a house literally right down the road from me, and they're now my neighbors. And Max was told by the people at our place, you need to go see Dr. Cruz's house. And when Max came in, it was nighttime. He had just finished playing golf. And he's like, holy shit, this whole house is red. He goes, this is incredible. And I explained to him and Stacy why it was going on. And they're headed back to the States now for a couple of weeks. But I told them when they come back, let's talk about it, because they're interested in this too. And this makes me feel good because they're the face of Bitcoin in El Salvador. And they know some of the work that I'm doing with Bukele and trying to fix the light story. So I feel like in 2024, the age of light's upon us, where Bitcoiners are beginning to wake up to this light story. So your question from your wife about myopia really resonates with me. And yes, I want you to both know that it does help. You just need to add a little bit of UVA, a lot of infrared A to your room. And for you, I don't have them now because they're in my room, but these glasses, you need to get yourself a pair of blue blocking glasses because you're on a screen. So you need to protect your eyes when you're doing podcasts. Mm-hmm. I'd also tell you, if you look at the room you're in, you got the small window behind you, I'm assuming you have a window on one side of you.
Yep.
Realize that glass blocks 40 to 60% of infrared A. It blocks most of the UV. So just being inside, the sun behind glass creates a blue light environment. So not only is the screen killing you, this is how the sun can kill you when you live indoors, which is another reason why humans get fat in Scandinavia. You're beginning to see how all these things coalesce and cause different issues. So getting blue blocking glasses helps. Is there another thing that you can do as a podcaster? Yeah, Iris software on your computer. You should have it on every computer. You should have it on your phone. You want to protect your eyes. And what does the Iris software do? It actually blocks the blue light, and it actually yokes to your computer clock. So it changes and blocks the appropriate amount of blue light as the day goes on, but it also blocks the flicker effect. And flickering of lights, the way I explain it simply, is you've probably had the experience that most humans have. When you go into a room and there's a fluorescent that's going bad, it flickers and you know that's time to change the bulb. What you don't know is when you put a new bulb in, it normally flickers 20,000 times per second. Your brain doesn't perceive it, in terms of vision, but your brainstem does through a pathway through cells in your eyes called Mueller cells. Turns out those Mueller cells actually help those other cells that your wife was concerned about with the red light. And that actually adds to the effect. So the number one effect from flicker is you get migraine headaches. And it's called the stroboscopic effect. So I'm sure you probably know quite a few people that suffer from migraine headaches. And what you don't realize is they're telling you they're blue light toxic and they live too much of an indoor existence. And those things can easily be fixed by the things you're talking about. So make sure your wife knows that the red light guru guys, they are giving you a partial truth. They're not telling you the whole thing. But the reason I mentioned to you, here, Chantel's got me the glasses to show you. These are the glasses.
Yep.
And they're very similar to the glasses, believe it or not, that Max and Stacy wear. This is another pair of Chantel's. Those glasses really do make a difference. And EMR tech guys, the guys that sell the red lights, they just came to meet with me 3 days ago in El Salvador. I set up a meeting with the Bukele administration and their company to build the first red light factory in El Salvador so that they can be manufactured here. And you'll be happy to know, Daniel, that Chris Sweeting, who's the CEO, is now going to put UVA lights in his red light so that your wife will have a solution for her myopia that isn't a half truth. So it was very prescient that your wife asked this question because literally I'm trying to solve for X right now in El Salvador.
That's amazing to hear. All right, brilliant. So this now leads me on to the sunglasses debate. And I love the Bitcoin Twitter that we get pulled into all different kinds of rabbit holes and seed oils and whatever else, which I know you also tackled way back when. But sunglasses, and some people call sunglasses a shitcoin. And I'd love to get, okay, they are. All right, straight in there. So yeah, go ahead. Please explain.
Well, it's you just gave me a beautiful segue because think about what we just talked about with your wife. I just told you that dopamine and melatonin redo the photoreceptors in your eye that regenerate your eye. Well, what do sunglasses do? They effectively block the light frequencies that come in. So, in Europe, almost every single sunglass made now has UV protection in it. Well, guess what creates melatonin and dopamine? UV light. So if you put a tarp over your eyes, do you think that signal is going to be generated in the anterior or posterior chamber of your eye? The answer is no, it's not. So the analogy that I use with, say, someone like your wife who doesn't know anything about biology, I said, let's make this really simple. I want you to think about when you come to Florida and your wife buys a house there and says, hey, Daniel, let's plant an orange tree in the backyard. And you guys go to Home Depot or Lowe's, you buy a small little orange tree, you put all the nutrients in the ground, you water it, and then all of a sudden your brother comes over, Daniel, puts a tarp over it. You think you're going to get any oranges? No. I mean, you know that. You're laughing because it's a third grade obvious answer. But here's the funny thing. We don't realize when we put clothes on our skin and sunglasses on our eyes or contacts on our eyes or even glasses in front of our eyes, we change the spectrum of the light from the sun coming in. Isn't that very similar to the story I just told you about your room and how the glass around you affects the sunlight? It's no different than when you put it on your eyes. And the way in which I did this biohack for President Bukele, he told me he had a very specific problem. And I told him it's related to the light that's in this room and the light you're in. He goes, come on, I can't believe it. So I pulled out my spectroscope and I showed him every light. And I said, look at this. Then we showed him what sunlight looks like. I said, did those two things look equivalent? He goes, no. I said, there's your answer. Now, the quantum mechanical answer gets to the issue that your wife asked about the red light and myopia. It's because specific frequencies of light raise dopamine and raise melatonin levels. And you need to have those light frequencies there. So if you put a tarp in front of your eye, you block that. That's the eye problem. Here's where the big problem becomes. What's right behind your eyes? Your pituitary gland. What does your pituitary gland make? Just about everything in your body. And guess what hormone controls that whole pathway? The leptin melanocortin pathway. Oh, look at that. We're back to the band TED Talk. You're beginning to see how all these little connections make a place. And it turns out if you block the leptin melanocortin pathway, can you create different endocrine problems? Can create obesity? Can you create transgender behavior? Can you create bad thinking? Can you create depression? Can you create the idea that getting tattoos all over your body is a smart thing? Can you create the ability that playing in the shitcoin casino with Coinbase is a smart thing to do? Yeah, that's actually how it happens. So, Daniel, now you fully understand why sunglasses change your reality so that you can start to believe more bullshit. So it's the anti-John Vallis issue. Sunglasses are anti-Bitcoin. So when I see pictures of Peter McCormick and Jason Williams on social media with sunglasses in their profile picture, what are they basically doing? They're basically saying you should listen to Daniel Prince more than you listen to me because I'm a fucking shitcoiner. That's what they're telling you. That's what Jack Cruz is saying.
So you just took me to a dark place again, Jack, because
That's good.
The first
Remember,
thing I can think about.
Wisdom. Don't be afraid to go into dark places.
All right. Well, the first thing I could think about was like this Bill Gates idea of we need to shield the sun.
Oh, I mean, that's obvious. I mean, think about it. That's what dermatologists tell you too. Dermatologists and Bill Gates have something fundamentally in common. If you block the sun, you make more money when you're part of the program. Isn't that exactly what I told you about the leptin melanocortin pathway in the band TED Talk? It's exactly the same idea. And Daniel, I'm going to tell you something that's going to shock you because I know your audience and you don't know this. Do you know the link that I've already made for you? The leptin melanocortin pathway, that big part in the middle, the melanocortin part. When you wear sunglasses, do you know that it preconditions your skin so that it stays white and you get more sunburns? Why? Because you need more of the light. So when Northern Europeans come to El Salvador and they get roasted and they have that outline on their face, I already know that they've got this huge problem. You cannot melanate your skin when you wear sunglasses all the time. So if you go and run out to Hyde Park every time the sun comes out and wonder why you get pink and white, there's the reason. You are down regulating the melanin production in your own body. In other words, it works just like a decentralized network. When you make something inside your body and you block it or take something like melatonin to increase it, you're totally fucking up the whole network. It's just like a 51% attack on Bitcoin. But people don't understand how just the simple little thing of putting clothes on their body or sunglasses on their eyes change the way their body and brain works. I did a consult yesterday here in El Salvador for a lady that lives in Southern California who asked me, she goes, look, I'd like to ask you a question about my husband. He hates the sun. He never goes out. Remember, he lives at the 33rd latitude, but he has to have both his hips replaced. So I said to him, I said, is he there in the house? She said, yeah. I said, go make him take off his shirt. So she asked him to take the shirt off, and he was white as the walls behind you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And this guy comes from a part of the world where he's not supposed to be that white. And I said, just so you know, the skin on the surface has this gene in it called POMC that makes melanin, which is alpha MSH. I said, UV light is the only thing that turns this gene on. I said, the skin on his thorax controls the nerves that contain melanin that go down to his hip. I said, the reason I asked you to take off your shirt is because if you need a hip replacement or a knee replacement, I guarantee you that your torso and your pelvis is going to be completely white. And then you can confirm that with his vitamin D level. And she goes, yeah, his vitamin D is terrible. He's on pills. I said, there you go. So the orthopedic surgeon has told you that your husband needs hip surgery. Do you know where that idea came from? It came from the dermatologist and the ophthalmologist. So in other words, what are they? They're the loss leaders that make sure that people are having joint replacement surgery. Got it? That's how this all works. And this is how centralized systems operate. And the thing is, when you examine what I'm saying, I can lay all the pathways out. Why did I know to look at this part of the thoracic spinal cord? Because I know where the nerves innervate those joints. I know where melanin comes in through the neuroectoderm. I post papers on my Patreon blog to show that to you. So when ignorant doctors come and tell me that this is absolutely quackery, bro, I'm the guy that is anti-quackery. I'm telling you what they're selling you is 100% quackery that's designed for big pharma and the industrial healthcare complex like Medtronic and Stryker to continue to put fake joints in people. Mm-hmm. You know, the last time I checked, the wolves in Yellowstone Park or the bears up in Scandinavia, they don't have hip replacements. They don't get that stuff. And they also don't wear clothes and they don't wear sunglasses. Okay? And you need to begin to realize how these things all link together. I'm not asking you to become a quantum biologist, you know, like I've become. All I want to do for a guy like you is you be able to answer your wife's question, do red lights matter? Will they help us and offset the modern things that we're doing in our life? Excuse me. So that we can enjoy our Bitcoin that you know, are saving, and that our daughter can have a life where she's not an economic slave. To me, that's the segue. I mean, everything that we've talked about in this podcast, to me, is linked one to the next to the next. Mm-hmm. The problem is it's very counterintuitive how they're linked to each other. And that's the reason why I think Bitcoiners are very open to this message, because they understand how monetary policy links to just about everything in their life. They don't realize that it actually really links to big pharma. Big pharma is the ultimate Cantillon effect. In fact, it's the number one cost everywhere in the world. Healthcare cost governments more than anything else. And you don't realize they're linked. The reason why governments support this idea is sicker people are easier to control. That's fundamentally the reason why it's happening.
Yeah, exactly. And the medical, pharmaceutical, agricultural complex is just one great big turning wheel. That
Correct.
The food that the chemicals they use to spray on the food that they shill us to eat by upturning the FDA like food approved food pyramid is on its head. It's a complete clown world.
Well, yeah, if you eat the FDA food pyramid, you'll look like a pyramid. That's right. Really effective. Yeah. What happens. And that's the reason why hospital food is the same way everywhere. Yep. But I would tell you, do I have some hope for the world? What's going on in Europe right now with the farmers is a beautiful thing to see. The problem is we need more people tweeting about what's going on in Europe with the farmers. Why? Because the government in the EU is trying to basically land confiscate. I will tell you a quick story about the United States. Most people think I'm crazy when I say this, but I got the numbers to back it up. I've never actually talked about this on a podcast because people don't think it's really a biologic story. It's more an economic one, but I think it's a biologic story. In 1991, 92, I did a paper when I was in medical school about this topic. At the time, we had 10 million farmers in the United States, and we had 88,000 workers in the bureaucracy of the U.S. agricultural society. Today in 2024, we have 3 million farmers and we have 323,000 people that work for the USGA. In that time, government ownership of land has gone up. What do? They bankrupt farmers, then they come in. Who's the guy that's been doing this work? As he sold his Microsoft stock, he's bought farmland. That's Bill Gates, the same guy that wants to block the sun. Why do you think this now exists? What's his real modus operandi? He's now one of the biggest landowners in the western part of the United States where this farmland is. So if you block the sun, you got to buy his food. And guess what? People can live without Microsoft. They can't live without food. That is the exact same process that's going on with the EU governments and the World Economic Forum. They are trying to land confiscate in Europe. And I don't think people in Europe really fundamentally understand this isn't a food story. This is a property rights story. This is an economic story. And
just to build on that story, just to link that all into medical, pharma, agricultural, food complex, Gates also in September of 2019, I think to the tune of 50 million, it doesn't matter the number, invested in a very unknown small German biotech company called BioNTech, which, as you know, was bought out by Pfizer, as you know, who he also owns stock of, for the tunes of tens of millions, and had the contract to push that, we can't say vaccine, poison, into hundreds of millions, if not billions of people around the world. It's also, I want to know actually, how if he's tied up in like this cloud seeding, these companies.
Yeah, he's involved in it. He actually owns shares of some of the companies. Most of the geoengineering companies are private now. They're not public, so you can't find out a lot of the data. But remember, when you have the modus operandi that he has, he's using a multifocal effect. What is he basically doing? The jab is just like sunscreen and sunglasses and clothes. The more you keep people out of the sun, the more compliant you make them for your products. That's effectively what Gates is doing. But he's doing it much more effectively than dermatologists and ophthalmologists do it. Why? Because he's trying to hit all the different systems at once, because he knows he is going to make you reliant on his products, but you're also going to be an economic slave to his partners that are in government. And people in the United States don't realize Bill Gates' dad was highly connected with the CIA and the governments. How did Bill Gates learn about all this? He learned about it as a young boy because his dad taught him how the government really works, how lobbyists work, and how you can technically, and I would tell you, militarize finance through fiat. I would tell you that I think that Bill Gates is the second generation of Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett figured out how to do it through Berkshire Hathaway. And this is the reason why him and Charlie Munger think that Bitcoin is poison, because they realize it's the antidote to what, you know, their empire was built on. And the same thing is true with Bill Gates. So this is the reason why, Daniel, I'm very, anything Bill Gates or the World Economic Forum or dermatology or ophthalmology for, Jack Cruz is against. Axiomatically true. Why? Because I know everything that they do is designed for profiteering on the bottom line to keep you out of the sun and keep you out of the environment. Now, you may have to dig a little bit to figure out the connection, but once you figure out the connection, it's there. Now, obviously, if you own Bitcoin, you're protected monetarily, but here's where the Bukele administration comes in. Where are you going to live when the monster is eating up everything all over the world, ruining your food supply, ruining the environment, ruining your water supply, ruining, photosynthetic yield, in your area. I mean, what does the beautiful air quality that we have in El Salvador here? If you look at the surrounds, I got volcanoes all around me that are all green. It's plants. So if you block the sun with geoengineering, I mean, effectively what you're doing is you're cutting off the life from its thermodynamic life source, which is the sun. I mean, it's absolutely fucking psychotic, on its basis, but that's effectively what the Gates Foundation's modus operandi is, and people don't see it. They think
they do see it, Jack, if they look up, right? Are we talking about the lines in the sky right now?
Yes, absolutely.
Oh my
Because
God.
those are done with silver halide chemistry. Look, I even know the chemistry. But in fact, I'll tell you a funnier story. When I got introduced to the Bukele administration, I wasn't supposed to be the keynote speaker, but it turned out they made me the keynote speaker because they had all these entrepreneurs from all over the world to come give them new ideas. And one of the guys that showed up there was a geoengineering guy. And he actually came up with the idea to steal water from Honduras to put in one of the Lemke riverbed in El Salvador by using geoengineering. And I stood up from the back of the room and I said, "You are a fucking shitcoiner." And I went nuclear. And of course, Bukele's people were there listening to this. The next thing you know, they canceled my talk, put me all the way at the end. Then they wanted me basically to moderate the whole thing and point out the craziness of all these ideas, all these entrepreneurs that want to come to the ark that's El Salvador to build a country that's based on the right principles. And you have to realize these profiteers are knocking at the door here. That's not what Bukele wants to do. Bukele wants to build an oasis in the economic and biologic desert that the world is becoming. The United States and Europe are part of that desert. Now, remember, there's more sand right now in Australia and Canada than there is in Europe and the United States. We still have grass. We still have water. But the forces in DC, the forces in the EU want to make us just like Canada and Australia. Now, I will tell you, Australia as the Commonwealth is actually beginning to wake up. Why? Because they've been devastated by vaccine injuries. They're beginning to wake up that they've been lied to. What's happening in Canada is not. I mean, let's talk about the Bitcoin angle in Canada. They have more debt ratios. They've devalued their currency more than any other country there. And what did Putin just say to Tucker Carlson? He said, "Don't you find it interesting that the Trudeau government had Congress stand up and clap for a Nazi?" Remember that Nazis, fascism, and communism all go together. And the funny thing is, Nazis, the real Nazis, Hitler, they couldn't stand communists back in the 1930s. But now, guys like Trudeau and the World Economic Forum have taken Nazism and fascism and put them together. That's why they're worse. I'm going to tell you that Trudeau, the World Economic Forum, most of the prime ministers in Europe, they're worse than Hitler. They are worse than what Hitler's doing. Hitler has got a bad rep because he killed 6 million people. I got news for you. From 1971 to right now, the EU and the United States, Canada and Australia have killed way more people than Hitler is. But you know what? There's no attribution to it because nobody's making the connection because they've dumbed us all down. Nobody is making these connections. So when I come on a podcast and say this, and I'm sure your audience in Europe, their heads are going to explode because they're not going to accept the hyperbole. When you functionally look at what they've done, it's far worse. And then when you consider what they're doing now, when you ruin people's air, water, and food, you're basically putting them on the road to, death and disease. And I don't want to say there's a lot of people out there that are conspiracy theorists that talk about they want to kill us. No, they just want to make us sick enough so that we really are a good economic slave. And this is where I try to make the point because it's active right now in Europe. People talk about malnutrition from farming. Malillumination is a far bigger problem than malnutrition because light controls photosynthesis. And that is the story that I think people need to understand. That's the story that I laid out to Huberman on the Tetragrammaton podcast. It's also why I did the Tetragrammaton podcast with Bobby Kennedy, because many of the ideas that I gave Bukele, 8 months ago, has now been given to Bobby Kennedy. In fact, several of the things that Bukele is really interested in, so is Bobby Kennedy. In fact, Bobby Kennedy's actively talking about him right now. Go listen to what he's saying. He's talking about chronic diseases. He's talking about how we've ruined the environment. He's talking about how that links directly to the budget. Remember, he's a Bitcoiner too. He gets it. And I think what we need to do is continue to do podcasts like this so people begin to see how these things all come together. I want people to understand that biology and finance are just like this. You may not see it initially, but they are. And it goes all the way back to your little girl's question.
And the problem is, Jack, a lot of people are, they're afraid to address these situations because they see how quickly people are cancelled. I mean, me asking you about lines in the sky, that's an easy one. Oh, you've got to just discredit these people now because it's just engine fumes. But when you look at how long the technology of cloud seeding has been around, this dates back to the 60s and 70s. And yeah, of course, the immediate feedback that people say is, oh, what, you think they're always trying to spray us, to poison us, to kill us? But now I understand right, okay, what if they're just spraying stuff up there to seed the clouds, to change the weather system a little bit, doesn't even have to be much, that makes a huge difference to us and the plants and the other animals that are living on this planet beneath us. Yeah, I mean, that makes way more sense and ties into everything that you've just been saying. And yeah, I urge people to look up more.
That's the reason I do podcasts. That's the reason I bring real science. Like the science that I talk about is quantum mechanics. Quantum mechanics is really difficult for people to understand, but quantum mechanics is true in Europe. It's true in the United States, just like it's true in Pluto or any other universe out there. These are universal laws. These are not subject to man's beliefs or man's randomized controlled clinical trials. The photoelectric effect, E equals MC squared. These are axiomatic universal laws of physics. And that's what this podcast fundamentally, like if you look at the cornerstone of Daniel Prince and Jack Cruz's discussion, those are the cornerstones. That's my Stonehenge. That's what my opinions are based on. So when you want me to take it all the way from that idea to why I think it's a bad look that a Bitcoiner is rolling up their sleeves on a tattooed arm to take a jab, now you know why I say it. Or when I see somebody wearing sunglasses or see somebody not protecting their eyes. I mean, this tells you who you should be listening to and who you shouldn't be listening to. It also points out something your wife highlighted. She's like, look, I saw this guy talking about myopia and red light. Maybe that's what some people get when they hear Jason talk or Peter talk. Okay, I get the Bitcoin thing, but I don't understand why they have all these other opinions. Well, it's because their frontal lobes don't work. You need to realize it worked enough for them to get the idea about Bitcoin, but no, it doesn't work enough about their political ideology. It doesn't work enough about how they think about biology. It certainly doesn't make any sense why you'd want to plant your stick in the sand in a place not like El Salvador. I understand people want to fight for the countries they're in, but if you're not waging the good war, you're not putting these dots connected and realize why the farmers are right in your neck of the woods doing the things you're doing, and you're out there talking about shitcoiners on a podcast, dude, you've lost the plot. You don't realize what's really going on around you. Just throwing in Bitcoin's not enough. What if you have billions of dollars of Bitcoin, but the land and the country you live in is so fucked up that your kids are screwed up? That's part of the reason why when people ask me, Jack, why did you make the decision 3.5 years ago to go from the first world to the third world? And I'm like, well, I think I got a head start because I think a lot of Americans are going to be climbing over the wall to come down here because this is an arc. It's an oasis where freedom's being built. I told people that Bukele is like George Washington on steroids. and you'll appreciate this because you're a Brit. King George fucked us from telling us how to pay taxes and also tell us how to worship God. Guys in DC are doing way worse than that. I mean, King George is a pleasure to deal with compared to Joe Biden or Donald Trump. I mean, these guys are sticking their hands in our pocket and stealing. I mean, just look what they did with Ukraine. You know, I just got into an issue with a guy that works with the Bukele administration telling me that sending money to Ukraine was a good thing. I said, it's not a good thing for the United States, not for the taxpayer. We're sending money of our kids over there to a bunch of Nazis. You know, that's what we're doing. And we're propping up a zombie country, just like we prop up zombie corporations. That's exactly what China did with everything. And it's about time that we call a spade a spade. Now, from a Bitcoin perspective, I actually think it's a good thing that the United States is doing that. But that's also the reason why I was an early pioneer and said I need to come to a place where it's like the United States was in 1801 when Thomas Jefferson decided, okay, let's buy the Louisiana Purchase from Napoleon for 12 million bucks. Now you can't even buy one city block in Louisiana for 12 million bucks. That was the greatest deal you could ever imagine in United States history. And then we recapitulated it with Alaska, you know, did the same thing. That part of our government is dying. We now have people in there that are taking pitchforks and sledgehammers to the pillars of the U.S. Capitol. And people are okay with this. Now, I think COVID was their first wake-up call. That's pissed off half the United States. But I think when money fails, I think, bro, that's when your ideology is not going to matter. Then I think you're going to realize we got a real problem, because then you're going to see poor kids going into iPhone stores and ripping the iPhones off and just start stealing. We're already seeing that in most of the blue states in the United States. You're going to break down the fabric of society. And I'm going to tell you, that's effectively what the people in Washington, D.C. want to do now that are in power in the Biden administration. Why? Because it creates economic slaves. That means they're easier to control. And that's what the modus operandi has been. They want to continue to feed the war machine. So eventually, the reason why they're pissed off is because when Trump came in, Trump did a lot of bad things on the biology side of things. That's the reason why I can't vote for him. But the one thing I'll give Trump credit for is that he put 2 Supreme Court justices in, because what the industrial military complex of the United States needs is they need a transition from fiat money to digital money. They need the CBDC. The 2 Supreme Court people that have come in under Trump, they're experts in the Fourth Amendment. The Fourth Amendment is the anti-CBDC amendment. So this is the reason why the power in DC, meaning the captured agencies that Bobby Kennedy talks about, the DOJ and the executive branch, the CIA, the FBI, were anti-Trump. Why they try to get rid of him? Because he was blocking the key pathway for them to transition from fiat to CBDC. Now, I believe what we're seeing is another pathway of destruction. They realize that Bitcoin is now inevitable, so they need to figure out a way to control it. I think that's why we finally got the spot ETFs. Everybody thinks the spot ETFs are a great thing. I happen to be one of those people that don't think it's a great thing. I actually think it's going to allow for rehypothecation of Bitcoin. Now, people that already own Bitcoin, me and you, Daniel, this point, again, this is where the theory of relativity comes in. If you are already orange pill and own Bitcoin, the spot ETFs are going to be looked at by you as an absolute boon. But it's the 99% of the idiots that own no Bitcoin that are going to get screwed. And it turns out that's most of the world. So when people ask me why I jumped to El Salvador, I just gave you my early answer. I was 6 steps ahead of everybody else on that clubhouse stage. And most of them mocked me for doing what I'm doing. So I'm coming here now on a podcast with you, and I'm laying all my cards on the table. Why? From my band TED Talk, one of the best quotes that I have ever made in my life. I said, ideation without execution leads to deletion of every good idea. So I'm going to tell you, Daniel Prince, I executed on the idea to leave the Titanic and to come on this little life raft in a little country that was doing things the way we used to do them in 1801 in the United States. I said, you know what? I'm going to bet large on a risky place that has a gang problem, that has this and that, because of what John Vallis told you on your podcast. Bitcoin infuses truth. So I don't think Bukele is a dictator. I think he is the philosopher king. And I think the proof of the thesis that I'm laying out to you here is just remember that he made Bitcoin legal tender before he put the bad hombres in jail. If you don't think that he knows what he's doing, then you're not paying attention. And certainly you don't know the history of how the gangs began and how they started and what they did. The gangs were a much bigger problem for the indigenous people of El Salvador. Right now, what people don't understand, El Salvador uses US money, so that means they're subject to inflation rates just like Americans are. And Bukele knew that. But you know what the big inflation problem was in El Salvador? Is the gangs were shaking people down for $300 to $400 a month. So guess what? That inflation rate for a Salvadorian, and a Salvadorian generally makes about $1,000 to $1,200 a month. So you're talking about 33% inflation rate for the last 25 years in El Salvador. So did he go after the biggest inflation problem? Isn't this the theory of relativity? So when Alex Gladstein talks his bullshit and talks bad stuff about Bukele, and I push back on him, and that's why he's blocked me on Twitter, because I have no time for his bullshit. He doesn't understand that fundamentally that the people in El Salvador were paying 33% tithe to the gangs. Bukele put a stop to that. Now the people here on February 4th responded, President, we like what you're doing. He's already given them freedom of money. The probably the biggest criticism I can give Bukele in his first term, you gave them freedom of money, but you haven't really taught them truly how to use it. But I know what his modus operandi is because I've talked to him about it. He knows that when American money fails, his people already have a system in place that they can use. Yeah, it'll be bumpy for a month or two, but I got news for you. What do you think it's going to be like in London? What do you think it's going to be like in Paris? What do you think it's going to be like in Chicago? What do you think it's going to be like in Los Angeles? We already saw it during COVID when people were looting, shooting each other up. We're seeing it in Paris right now where farmers are throwing shit at the government, through their tractors. We're seeing it in Denmark. People don't see what's going on right in front of them. It's almost like the answer is right there, but nobody gets it. And to take you back to finish the idea that I started with, ideation requires action. It requires execution. So Bitcoin is a great idea, but I'm telling you, Daniel, and I'm telling the rest of the Bitcoin world, you got to execute decentralization everywhere in your life. You got to listen to what John Vallis said. The jab I want you to take is the Bitcoin jab. I want it everywhere in you. I want the biology. I want you to understand light. I want you to understand why they're trying to control us. It's to make us all economic slaves. Most of the people that listen to your podcast, they already know and they understand Bitcoin ethos. The part that I want them to get is the part that your wife brought to the table, the part your daughter brought to the table. Realize you got to do more, and realize that living where you are right now in Europe may not be the wisest thing for you 5 or 10 years from you, when Bill Gates' plan, when the World Economic Forum plan, when the EU's plan is fully in place.
Right. I love it. Okay. Jack, I want to ask you a fun question as we start wrapping it up. And again, it's about light. And again, it's about something that went around Bitcoin Twitter in a big way. And it was about sunning your balls. Sorry,
You
you
know
had
who
a big
started that,
mouthful of
right?
water there.
Just so you know, I started that. It's called junk.
Did you?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's called
So
junk maintenance.
can you unpack it for us? Because there was a lot of people that just thought it was a funny meme, and there were a lot of people that like, well, no, there's something huge to this, and it boosts testosterone and vitamin D uptake and whatever else. So
Well, it doesn't do that.
okay,
So
so
I'll explain to you. You have to
we need
understand.
the facts,
Yes,
the
you have
fun
to understand how it
facts.
works. When the sun rises in the morning, and
Mhm.
I'm going to speak to most places. This is not true for equatorial zones. You need to see AM sunlight. The reason why is red light in the sun, which is 43% of sunlight, turns on your pituitary gland so that you make all the sex steroid hormones. It turns out UV light, UVA and UVB, turn off the sex steroids. So what is nature telling us? There's an on switch and an off switch for your sex steroid hormones. But here's the interesting thing. The cancers that women and men get, both prostate, ovarian, uterine, cervical. Remember your story about the Scandinavians. You have these areas covered. Your wife and your daughter probably haven't run around naked since they're 4, 5, 6 years old. So think about the diseases that women get. They're epithelial cancers. If they got UV light exposure on their breasts and their perineum, which is that part of their body where their ovaries and all their GYN stuff is, or where your gonads are, would you get prostate cancer? Think about your king. He's got urinary cancer. You know that nobody in the royal family is sunning their balls in Balmoral. It's not happening. But you need to realize that these things actually are true and operational, that you need to let all parts of your body be optimized to the sun. Now, I'm going to tell you specifically with sunning your balls, it's actually better for you to do it early in the morning when red light predominates. Why? Because remember, there's a diurnal variation of sun, and it varies with latitude. So, for example, where you are, you have a much bigger window to raise your testosterone from sunrise to say about 8 or 9 a.m. because that's when UV light shows up at your level. In fact, where you are now, there is no UV light because you're still in the winter. Where I am, UV light shows up in 20 minutes. So I don't have a big window to sun my balls. So I sun my balls all the time. And you don't know this, but right on the roof above me, I have a deck of grass. In fact, you were going to be one of the podcasters that I did the podcast with up on the roof today. But today happens to be a pretty windy day. We've got about 30 mile an hour per winds because in the wintertime, the wind comes this way. And believe it or not, that's also a solar effect. It's called the Coriolis effect. And we're now at a time where this is beginning to change. The wind will come the other way. It will come from the Pacific Ocean, which is behind me. This way is Guatemala. This way is North America. The wind is coming down. So sunning your balls actually is something Bitcoiners should do. But the way in which you do it wisely. Do it more early in the morning, or you can do it later in the day, closer to sunset, when the UV light diminishes. But the best time to do it, without a doubt, is in the morning. The reason that you want a little bit of daytime sun when UV's out, because you want to increase melanin in those areas, because believe it or not, your central nervous system needs those nerves where the POMC gene is to turn on. This is the reason why we get ovarian cancer. It's the reason why we get uterine cancer. It's the reason why we get prostate cancer. It's also the reason why we get testicular cancer. It's the reason why we need joint replacements. It's the reason why our knees go bad. It's the reason why we have problems, with our feet. All of those things are operational. So junk maintenance, or as I call it for ladies, garden maintenance, is something that's wise to do. You just need to realize that you have to do it differently based on the latitude that you're at because of where the switch comes on. And just for your listeners who think this is bullshit, realize this is the reason why the really nasty cancers like that women get, you hear about triple negative breast cancer. It's because the progesterone and estrogen receptors all get down regulated because of the malillumination that they've allowed for most of their life. Mm-hmm. So You need to get the women in your life to understand this. And it's a hard thing to do, but you'll be happy to know, Daniel, that the Europeans have actually done something good for women in this area. There's a company in the UK called Kiniki, Kiniki, and they make sun swimsuits and sundresses for ladies that the sun penetrates, goes right through. So they can be naked without being naked while you're having people over to your house, okay? We have a place in the United States called Cool Tan that does the same thing. And I have one of my young members who's probably a little bit older than your daughter. She's about 22, 23. You can follow her on Instagram. Her handle is soul_health. She makes really fancy bathing suits for young girls to get this. And she's also a Bitcoiner. And you can support her in her endeavor, to change this about women. Because it's really important. Because again, we want to make sure that we create young, healthy, decentralized beings so that they can think and listen to podcasts like this so they can connect the dots for themselves. Because remember, I'm an old boomer. I'm not going to be around forever. And I feel like when I die, this information is going to die with me, just like the Library of Alexandria died. And I think doing podcasts with you timestamps this information, because the Bill Gates, the World Economic Forum, the EU, they want to bury this. I am having to spend a lot of money per month to fight the same thing that your little daughter asked me in the beginning. They are trying to cancel me. And I am fighting tooth and nail. And the reason I can do it is because I'm a Bitcoiner. Okay? And this information is that important for you to get out. That's the reason why this mural is posted behind me. If you walked in my house, Daniel, if you ever come to El Salvador, I'll show you. The first thing you see when you walk in my house is a picture on 2 mirrors that have 2 sayings in French. And these sayings in French tied directly to why the French helped us prior to the American Revolution. Freedom began because the French helped the United States. The next thing you'll see in my house is American freedoms. You'll see the Statue of Liberty. You'll see pictures that Peter Max painted. So then you see the transition from the French to the American dream. Then you come see Bukele's wall behind me of freedom. I had a Salvadorian artist paint that. His name is Cruz. On the top, you'll see Bitcoin City. That's not yet built. You'll see the picture of the lady. Notice that I left the sunglasses on. And what did I put in the sunglasses? What do you see here? The laser eyes. This is for people like Jason Williams and Peter McCormick to realize this is where we are now. We need to take the sunglasses off. That's what we need to do. That's the reason why the mural is behind me. You're the first podcast that I've ever done with the mural behind me. And I want this story to resonate to people. Even when you own Bitcoin, you're not doing enough. And realize that. That's not said to slap you in the face. I told you, I think 3 or 4 times in this podcast already, wounds create our wisdom. What am I trying to do? I am trying to wound you. When you follow me on Twitter or you see me on Clubhouse, what am I doing? I am tongue lashing you and beating you up just like we beat doctors up in a morbidity and mortality conference. That's what we do. You learn from your mistakes. And if we learn from our mistakes, we can do great things. Okay? We don't learn from our successes. And in fact, I would venture to say that people like Jason and Peter, that's the reason they continue to make mistakes, because they've been so successful with Bitcoin. They don't realize there's more fat on the bone. And it was a pleasure to come on your podcast and show you the soft white underbelly of what Bitcoiners might be missing. And I think if we can get that message out, our tribe, our Bitcoin tribe, is going to be stronger and more forceful in fighting the axis of evil that's trying to take over the world. Right now, I believe the only oasis of freedom in the world is in El Salvador. And I will tell you, prove me wrong. I think I've laid the case out here on your podcast pretty well, why I believe that. I think my thesis is here. I'm okay with people wanting to tear it apart. People have been trying to do that for 20 years. I'm still standing.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to finish off what we were talking about with the sun, and I mean, it's a fun topic, sun in your balls, but then everything we've been told, everything, and again, this heavily on like lays on the women because of what you brought up with the cancer. Everything what we've been told is the sun is bad for you. Put on this sun cream, or you're going to get or you're going to get skin cancer, which is the complete opposite, right?
Yep.
Total lie.
Listen, Daniel, if you go to my Instagram right now, I think the last thing I posted was a paper that says, and this is a peer-reviewed paper in the dermatology literature. It says the more sun you get, the better it is for your melanoma prognosis, meaning that the sun doesn't cause melanoma. The fake light that we got does. And if you block the sun, you're going to die from melanoma faster. In fact, all the bad problems associated with melanoma is fixed by the sun. How's that for a shocker? Isn't that go back to your little girl's question? So,
Mate, and as well,
why,
it's the cream. Is it not the cream that we're slathering all over
the
ourselves and
cream,
our
it's the
kids that's giving us
sunglasses,
the?
it's the clothes, it's everything. It's not one thing, my friend. Realize that this is a 51% attack to
Yes.
your body.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
And people don't realize it. I'm that crazy SOB that's been screaming from the rooftops for 20 years. But you don't get it. And I'm hoping that people, at least in our community, who actually do think about decentralization of money, begin to realize we need to decentralize our biology. I mean, some of you guys are some of the best thinkers in finance that are going to listen to this. I think you need to listen to my perspective. And I'm happy to tell you that Bobby Kennedy's listening to me. Nayib Bukele's listening to me. Why the fuck aren't you listening? And these guys are behind. They're in the Bitcoin community. Max Kaiser now. Guess what? Daniel Prince. This tsunami wave needs to go everywhere in our community. And it's not counterintuitive to the Bitcoin ethos. In fact, it makes the Bitcoin ethos even bigger.
Absolutely. All right, Jack, I always end with the same question. So, if you had one last orange pill left to give to somebody, who would you give that to and why?
I would give it to the people who listen to your podcast, because I fundamentally believe the people that have open minds are the ones that deserve the orange pill. The lesson that I've learned from evolution is that not everybody survives. That's why we have extinction events, and it's the reason why people get sick and die. Not everybody deserves time. Not everybody deserves life. Not everybody deserves Bitcoin. So I think the people that do the hard work of decentralized thinking, if there's one of you out there, two of you out there that like what Daniel Prince and I just talked about, you're the people. You're the people that I want to have the pill, because you're the people that are going to rule the world 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, 50 years from now, 100 years from now, 1,000 years from now, when Daniel and I are long dead and Bitcoin is injecting truth to our species.
Love it. Jack, how can people reach out if they want to carry on the conversation or find out more about you? Where's the best place to follow your work?
Well, it's pretty simple. On social media, it's Dr. Jack Cruz, Kruse, pretty much everywhere. Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, although I don't really do Facebook that much, but you can find it there. Most of the stuff that I talk about is decentralized medicine, quantum biology. Do I have a book on Amazon? Yes, you can read it. It's called the Epipaleo RX. Do I have a Patreon that talks almost exclusively about many of the things Daniel and I talked about? Yeah, it's patreon.com/Dr. Jack Cruz. And I think probably the last thing is on my website, which is jackcruz.com. If you decide you want to become a member, I do have a membership where I teach people. I have a lot of doctors, obviously, that I teach, but also a lot of Bitcoiners, a lot of professional athletes who are clients of mine. You can hire me if you choose to do that. But if you just want to spend more time with me and ask me questions directly about your health, you go to info@cruz@destin.com or just go to jackcruz.com. That's where you get more of my time. And I share a lot on social media for free on my old Jack Cruz website. There's plenty of free blogs that you can read. If you go to LinkedIn, I think there's actually about 190 free notes that I've written about different topics. So I don't want to make people think that I'm doing this for money, because just so you understand, Daniel, my Patreon only costs $5 a month. So if you don't think that I'm worth a cup of coffee a month for the ideas that you and I are sharing, then you're not part of my tribe. It's as simple as that. Why? Because I don't believe when you give people something for free, they do anything with it. I think that they have to have skin in the game. That's actually a decentralized idea. Skin in the game is a synonym for proof of work. Okay, if there's no proof of work, it's not going to land its punch.
Excellent. Well, thank you for giving up the time. Thanks for coming on. Thanks for everything you're doing for Bitcoin. We'll do a follow-up one perhaps in a year's time when some more news has come out in El Salvador and you're a little bit further down the line. It's been really great to do this one, Jack. Appreciate it.
Hey, no problem. It was nice to meet you, and also nice to meet your daughter. Please tell her I loved her question.
Thank you. Have a good afternoon.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.